for sports, and as if the sports are not even only pastime or hobby, but also a way of life, so to speak. That checks, I think, because the Australians, when they appear in a bigger number at some conference or some other multinational gathering, they usually look a little bit more robust, more physically developed. And so this is some sort of Australian speciality, but not of course not the only one. But the Australians are also perceived as more full of humor and self-distant than the Americans, but they also are perceived as also a little bit racist, like the Americans. It could be, during the discussion with the students, I suggested, and I stay with these suggestions, but I'm, of course, it's a complicated matter, but it's only a way of looking at it. It's that Australians, for instance, they were the English, the British in Australia and the British in New Zealand were colonizing, of course, both of those places, but they had to cope with totally different aborigines. So the Maori culture of New Zealand, they were relatively well developed culture, and they have, of course, fought very violently against the English, and the English were very violently fighting with them, against them. And the same in Australia with the Australian Aborigines. But the Australian Aborigines were so little developed that they had no chance of merging culturally eventually, when the racist element was over, when they had a little chance of merging their culture with British culture. And in New Zealand it was very successful an evolution. They we could risk an opinion that in New Zealand the most prominent citizens of that culture are the Maori people, and the people of Maori descent, and the people, for instance, like the famous opera singer Kiri Te Kanawa, for instance, and the Australian Army is very much bicultural, and we can see the traditional local war dances, not very European in style by no means, and but also performed by both New Zealand's Asian looking and European looking privates and soldiers. So that's really something with like a successful merger, and we don't have this successful merger in the case of Australia because of too big gap between the British and the Aborigines in Australia. So and then in comparison, the Australians can look a little bit more racist, like than the New Zealand, which in the comparison seems like some sort of bicultural paradise, right? So okay, so because I have deeply analyzed the last year the problem of the stereotypes about Australians, I now only state a couple of main differences between the current series of lectures and the series of lectures from the last year. I will finish with the Australian, typically Australian thing, which is the sound produced by people who want to avoid being killed by the other huntsmen when they are hunting in the forests, which is coo-ee.